So I will record this meeting as I mentioned so we can share with those who were unable to attend today. I'm just gonna wait like 30 more seconds and then we can start. And I think that we'll just hopefully have people joining us as we go. And I'll keep an eye on the chat to make sure I let people in on time. All right, I think we should start. It's already 11:05, and I'll just be watching for those who are joining us a little bit later to let them in. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. You're attending Team Building, Onboarding, and Tech Support for your staff webinar. This webinar is part of the Work from Home series organized by Workforce Planning Board of Waterloo, Wellington, and Dufferin. The webinar will run until 12 p.m. and the webinar will also be recorded. Let me tell you a little bit about the series itself and why we have decided to organize it. I'm sure almost all of you know what Workforce Planning Board of Waterloo, Wellington, Dufferin does, but for those of you who are new to our events, we're experts in local labor market. We do community research projects addressing pressing issues that arise in the community. So about the series itself, the pandemic has accelerated the future of work trends to work from home. For some companies, they may never fully return to the workplace or may shift to a hybrid model. Employers, managers, and supervisors are facing challenges with this model, and the series would help bring experts and peer companies in to discuss these challenges, solutions from recruitment to team building. A series of workshops for job seekers who are seeking out remote work would pair up with this employer series to set expectations and working practices so people are prepared for these opportunities. So as I mentioned, this is the series for employers and job seekers. We had 2 webinars delivered in the past, one for job seekers and one for employers. So both of those webinars did a great overview of some of the issues that employers and job seekers experienced and gave them some tips and tools on how to smoother transition to this new reality. We do have 2 more webinars coming up. One is held on October 27th, and it's about how to stand out in a virtual team. This is done in a partnership with Career Education Council, and this is a webinar for job seekers where we will give them tools and some tricks for their bag of tricks to how to showcase the work they've done in a virtual team, how to really shine, and how to really become your own champion. And one more webinar for employers that we're hosting is about human resources policies and guidelines. We have 2 human resources professionals coming to give us an overview of what are the new policies, or give us some guidelines of what are the new policies that executives and senior managers need to develop in this new world of work, where either the whole team was working virtually, or some of the team was working from the office, some of the team was working from home, or there's some hybrid arrangement. So that's quite an interesting one as well. That one, excuse me, is held on November 2nd. So about the event structure today, we have 2 wonderful speakers, and I will introduce them in just a moment. They will deliver the presentation and share their experiences of how they did their team building when we all tried to transition online, how they did onboarding, and what kind of tech support they used for their employees. And I believe they also came up with a few more very interesting topics to share with us. So our first speakers, Andrea Vrbanac. She's VP of People and Culture at Exonify. As the VP of People and Culture at Exonify, Andrea serves as a trusted partner working in collaboration with all areas of the organization to understand business needs, establish priorities, and develop effective people solutions that align with overall strategy, values, and business goals. Andrea has 15 years of progressive human experience as a proactive business partner to senior executives and leaders in guiding the growth and development of their organizations at leading organizations, including BlackBerry and ATS Automation. And our second speaker is Christine Vigna. She is a VP of People and Culture at Degero. As the VP of People and Culture, in her role as Vice President of People and Culture at Degero, Christine Vigna is responsible for creating and driving programs and services that deliver on Degero's people strategy, provide an exceptional employee experience, as well as continuing to grow and develop the culture at Degero. Prior to joining Degero, Christine had a diverse range of human resources, advisor, and project management focused roles in the non-for-profit, regulatory body, and technology sectors. Christine is a certified human resources leader, also a certified leadership coach, and brings a strong coaching presence and mindset to all of her work. Christine is active within the Waterloo Region community, serving as the past president on the board of directors for a local charitable organization and is a mentor to other HR professionals. And for now, I'm done with my part introducing our wonderful speakers and giving you a little bit of an overview of the series itself. And I would like to give the word to Andrea and Christine and tell us all about their experiences.
Thank you, Olga. I'm just going to share my screen now and get the presentation up. So just one moment. Can everyone, Olga, can you give me a thumbs up? Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Wonderful. So we created this presentation, Christine and I, and we've called it Driving Connections Through Hybrid Work Model. And what we're hoping to walk with you through the next hour is what is hybrid. We've been hearing a lot of that, and so we're going to share with you what our the definition and thoughts are, the notion of a paradigm shift that we're seeing in today's workforce, expectations of today's workplace from the employee and leader perspective, best practices, and then we go into speaking through the employee life cycle. So considerations, tips and tricks that we have done through our time implementing a hybrid working model that hopefully that you can take away and try within your workplace. We'll share with you some external resources and as well address any questions. We've built in a time at the end of today's presentation to cover some questions that you may have. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you, Preeti and Charlene, for joining us today. So the basics, I think we're all pretty familiar, but we'll start right at the top, right? So what is a hybrid workplace and what does it mean to have a hybrid work model for your organization? So we know that like a fully remote work organization where everybody's working from home or a fully in-office organization where everyone is working in office. Hybrid plan means that you might have some employees who are working in the office, while you may have key teammates who are also working from home, vice versa, right? So effectively, your folks are split across multiple locations. It could be multiple offices with some at home or whatever that looks like for your organization. The other thing that we just wanted to drop in here that we hear a lot about is asynchronous versus synchronous work. And we know that that's a big part of how we plan out our models and deciding what effectively works for your organization. So, the asynchronous model is when folks complete tasks on their own timetable, when it makes sense, how they blend that with work life, etc. That also means that communication and responses, etc., are not expected to be immediate. Folks will respond when it's convenient and when it fits into the hours of their workday as they have defined. When we're speaking about synchronous work, that means folks are working within the same time block. So for example, your organization may say that you have core hours between 10 and 4 or whatever that looks like for your team, and communication and responses are expected within that time block because everyone is online or involved in work during those hours.
Awesome. Sorry about my technical difficulties. My mouse was a little quick on the draw there, Chris.
No worries.
So wanted to speak through this paradigm shift. I've been reading and hearing a lot about this recently, and in this notion of how we are approaching work today. And it's the idea that we're shifted from a very transactional way of viewing hybrid into a more relational way of hybrid. So we know at the March 2020, we shifted to becoming virtual overnight, and many organizations had to plan their business continuity quite quickly and often focus on quite a lot of transactions to ensure that operations of their business kept going. And that was quite the focus for the first, I would say, months of 2020 during the pandemic. Now that we've settled into that routine, a lot of workplaces and leaders are focusing on this relational aspect of how we view work and how we view work design. So that's about building connections and thinking through the people-centric approach, like how that will impact. And that is the success of maintaining hybrid that we'll talk through, is viewing work through that lens of how we build connections, how we bring a people-centric view to how we work, how we plan onboarding, how we build social events. It's just really taking into perspective how an employee would feel in terms of their new way of working. So that's kind of a very important shift that I wanted to reflect on and share in today's discussion. So
Okay.
Go ahead. Thanks, Christine. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So Preeti and Charlene, not to put either one of you on the spot, but we had just composed a couple questions for the group, so we'll put them out to you if you're comfortable answering. But where's your general sense in terms of your organization? Are you feeling as though you have a successful and scalable hybrid work model in place? Or are you feeling as though there's some areas that you're wanting to dig in a little bit further and spend some more time refining as your organization continues to navigate the pandemic and the shift to whatever a new normal is?
I think it's safe to say that we're kind of getting there. We're a small group, so we're still working out our bugs, I think, at this point, and what's happening and how it all happens.
Okay, that's great. Thanks so much for sharing.
Okay.
Great. And Charlene, I'll revert back to you because I know you said you're still working through it, if you don't mind me. What are the biggest challenges you're facing as it relates to your hybrid model?
I would say, being a small organization, it's probably the cost of technology is our big challenge. And we're rural, so we also have, when we are in the office, an internet challenge. Because the infrastructure doesn't exist, and where it does exist, its cost is too much for the budget.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's a really good point. I think a lot of smaller to medium-sized organizations, cost is a significant impact on the tool availability and the choices that you make around the tools, right? So we'll chat a little bit further in the presentation just about some considerations, also some great resources that Andrea and I have stumbled across that help us. We certainly don't have large budgets either, so what we found to have worked for our teams, and hopefully we can, as a group, share some of the key tools and great resources that we've come across that have supported each of our teams.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So want to get into the expectations of today's workplace. So picking up on, the notion of this paradigm shift in terms of being people-centric. And we're seeing and reading this as well, perhaps the great resignation or the talent shuffle is really understanding what employees want in their workplaces today. And it's because the way the people of work has undergone a rapid and radical transformation. It's enabled candidates and employees to reevaluate their priorities and expectations. So it's more than just allowing for hybrid work or flexibility. There needs to be that dedicated investment in employees. So I quoted some sources at the bottom of the slide here where I've read and obtained some of my data that I'm sharing right here. But surveys reveal that employees and candidates want flexibility in how they work. They want collaboration with their leaders and peers, and they want inclusive work environments, work-life balance, and access to tools to enable this way is working. So we'll share what we've done here at Exonify, and it was well with Christine. We'll share what she's done at DeGero with some of the tools we've done to enable that. The interesting thing that I've been reading is the offering of flexible work arrangements needs to also be hand in hand with policies and practices to support work-life balance, because you want to avoid employee burnout because of that never-ending digital workday. And so it's very important that while you're planning flexibility, or if you're considering hybrid, how does that impact employees' actual sense of being able to step away and achieve that balance? On the leader side, which is also, realization most recently from leaders and organizations that to be successful, they are bringing that people-centric approach to their practices, and leaders are prioritizing such things as digital collaboration platforms to address, like, how do we collaborate? They are enabling worker choice in terms of work arrangements and scheduling, and they are adjusting meeting norms. And Christine spoke at the beginning around asynchronous and synchronous communication, and also how that can be applied to perhaps lessening the meeting loads that we often see and hear. There's focusing on learning and development and well-being to support the hybrid way of working, but also to reinforce employee engagement, which is a great indicator of retention, which is an important element for organizations today to really retain the workers that they have. So it's, again, really that people-centric approach, and it's a good that there is correlation between what employees want and what leaders want from their organization. So we'll be focusing on many aspects of these points here on the slide through the next upcoming slides that we're going to talk through. So wanted to kind of focus on three concepts, and I know I've introduced one of them already, and we've also talked through a few when we just had those popping questions. But introducing a new hybrid working model into business requires an investment in culture and establishing new ways of working. So that would be your associated policies and procedures. So it's important to realize that it's not a one-size-fits-all as you approach to build a solution. It's important to recognize that there could be different roles within the organization that requires a different need. And so that depending on the needs of specific roles, you may have a different working model based on what the organization needs to deliver. So as you're considering your model, you need to think through these concepts. So being people-centric that we've talked about already. The second piece is that technology. So how can we enable technology to ensure that it's seamless and easy to use, whether you're in person or you're online, and that it can support maybe different interfaces. So if you are using Zoom or Google Meets, or if you utilize Slack, we use that as a kind of a chat communication function, but also supports video as well. But you would need to really, if you're able to, partner, depending on the size of your organization, with your IT team, and to ensure that what are you clear on what you're solving for from a technology side, will that enable a certain behavior outcome that your employees are looking to have to support the way they work or to support how they collaborate. There's a lot of new technologies coming up to the forefront, again, budget specific, but just be clear as to the technology is a means to, to the right outcome. The other aspect that when you're designing your workplace practices is remove friction or obstacles, as another way of putting it. So it's, when you're speaking to your employees, get a sense of what's working, what's not working, and then see where you can make it easier to access things or do things. So it's just not intentionally adding a barrier to how we work. And so what this may have resulted, and I know we've been fine-tuning our practices. So at the beginning of the pandemic, you want to take a cut and copy paste of how you interact in the office and apply that to the online. Well, we know that from Zoom fatigue and often meeting fatigue, like a lot of meeting fatigue, that's not possible or sustainable. So we had to change our ways of working through introducing no meeting Wednesday afternoons, move to more asynchronous communication as examples of how we had to modify our way of working and remove friction and enable the right technology and tools. So, my takeaway for this slide is, as you're looking through your culture, your programs, your practices and policies, keep these three concepts in mind and see where how they can evolve your thinking. Okay, let's get into some of the nitty gritty of some of the best practices that we've got here for you.
Great, thank you, Andrea. So as Andrea shared with us, thinking through those three pillars of, our best practices for a hybrid work model, what we heard Andrea speak about is flexibility, right? So understanding that flexibility is imperative for all of your team members and recognizing that different teams and different roles may have different needs and may produce their best work under, different arrangements. And so while flexibility is incredibly important as we work through a hybrid model, it's also important that there's certain areas that we build in structure, right? We know that humans thrive with structure, but it's blending the structure with the flexibility. And when we speak about structure, it's thinking critically about, as per the purpose of our presentation, how do we drive those connections? So how do we use that structure to help curate interactions? So, social interactions across teams, really good working connections, etc. So, some of the things that we've kind of been working through as an organization that have really helped us is thinking critically about how we want to, like I said, drive those social connections across team members. So again, hearing Andrea about how do we take a break from that video meeting, kind of that flow, and how do we break and pause and give folks those moments that we're missing from the office, right? Just those casual social interactions. So really thinking about what that means. So blending in the technology that you have to build in those social moments, but also how do we get those in-person social moments, knowing we're in a hybrid work model and not everyone's going to be present or have the opportunity to be present. What we have found is thinking critically about what employees define as in-office work. So thinking about what might bring employees into the office. So what types of work do they feel like they want to be doing in office if they do have that option to work both from home office or in the office? And so, having an employee buy-in on that definition will help produce success in terms of understanding what the work environment will look like and how you drive connections through the work that will be done in office versus in home. You also need to think about teams who are geographically dispersed, right? And I think that this kind of gets magnified as we experience some of the hiring challenges in the market right now. So, if perhaps organizations were more centrally focused in their hiring, they need to be expanding and thinking about where else they can find the critical talent that they're needing for their organization. But of course, that presents a different reality in terms of how they connect with their peers. And Andrea's mentioned a little bit about that as well. The other thing that's really important as it relates to driving connections and creating structure is thinking about celebrations and traditions. And we'll actually talk about it a little bit further down in the presentation as well. But we know that traditions and celebration are so critically important, right? They give our minds something to connect to. They help ground us. They help remind us about what our values are and what types of things are to be celebrated and what celebrations typically look like. We also know that that gives all of us a shared narrative, and it really gives us something to hang on to in terms of joy and purpose. So, thinking through what structure around those traditions and celebrations look like is really important. And again, thinking through the hybrid model, what does that celebration or tradition look like for those who will be in office versus those who might not be able to join an office or who choose not to join an office? So it's critically important that you think about those underlying pieces of that structure while still having flexibility as your key model. Okay, so a couple other things to think about, and I mentioned on my last slide, is having employees define what type of work feels like it needs to be done in office versus what type of work can be done at home or from your home office. So for example, there are some types of meetings that just naturally, by the type or theme of work that's being done, really do benefit from collaboration with peers, right? And so when we think about some of the types of work that typically benefit from high collaboration, it might be a new product or in-depth instructions. So things that are really detailed, or those that might have complex hardware or equipment needs, or challenging topics that maybe it would be really great to see folks and have that opportunity to discuss in person. Team building, right? So one of the most effective ways we bond with each other is being together, being in each other's presence. We know that from a psychology perspective, folks bond not over screens. We can't quite absorb the nonverbal cues like we do in person. So that's really important too. High volume attendee meetings, right? So how many of us have had a town hall with a few hundred employees and it's crickets, right? It's really hard to put your hand up in a virtual environment in a large group, knowing that you can't see most folks' faces, and that can be really intimidating. So having those opportunities to get larger groups together when it's safe to do so, and whatever that looks like. Obviously, we're all operating with various legislation right now and thinking through the comfort levels of your group. But as we continue to think about hybrid work model from a longer term perspective, how do we bring everyone together when it's safe to do so? As we already mentioned, social, right? So we know that connecting with each other is critically important. So for example, right now, it might not feel comfortable to have anything social indoors, but what are the types of events you could do outdoors, right? And that way you're being inclusive of those folks who are a little bit more comfortable with indoor and outdoor events, but also those folks who aren't comfortable being indoors with folks they're not bubbled with. And that's a key consideration when thinking through that. And then difficult conversations, right? We know from an HR perspective, unfortunately, by nature of our work or as a people leader, sometimes we have to have those conversations, and it's best to have those in person. That might mean grabbing a coffee and going and sitting on a patio. That might mean meeting in a park, or it could mean meeting in the office, whatever that looks like for your team. But just, really putting that thoughtful lens around those conversations before they happen, to think about what location would best serve them. And then when we think about, work that could be done at home, it's typically meetings where there's fewer attendees, information that's easy to disseminate, right? Or concepts that are easily shareable. Perhaps you can send around a document. If some of you are using Google Docs, it's a really great collaboration tool, or the Google Suite, I would say, just in general. Regular standing meetings. So we've heard from a number of folks that they've gotten into the habit of meeting with their teams on a daily basis, or every other day. Some are still meeting weekly, bi-weekly, whatever that looks like. But those can typically be done from a virtual or from a work from home perspective, because they're lower pressure, right? And they're a little bit more casual in nature. And then the other just general announcements, right? So if you can cover it via email, or perhaps in a chat, if you can just send out some information that way, that's a great way to still make sure that your information was shared across your whole team, but you also didn't have to bring the whole group together. Okay, so we mentioned, both Andrea and I have mentioned tools and the importance of tools, or the role and the importance that tools will play within us finding success within the hybrid work model. And so, as Charlene, you had mentioned, budget is a big consideration, and naturally that's going to drive some of the options that you and your organization have available to you when choosing those tools. Another really critical piece to think through as we, get further and further into our hybrid models is thinking about the types of collaboration and connectivity tools that are going to help us drive equity across our organization and team, right? So when we think through a DE&I lens as it relates to tools, we need to think about who might not be able to physically join meetings as often as others. So for example, folks with transportation challenges or those with additional care responsibilities, they may find a better balance working from home. And if your organization has flipped to a hybrid model, that's actually going to be a benefit. And so thinking through those tools that create an equitable and accessible environment, that's going to be critically important, so that everyone has a consistent experience and an opportunity to participate, right? There's been, and I'm forgetting the source here, so my apologies, but there's a great article put out, I think it might have been Harvard Business Review, but they were talking about what they're foreseeing as there will be more caregivers working from home and what that's going to do. And so we know that traditionally a lot of the caregiving falls on women. And so, they said that organizations really need to be thoughtful about how they're being inclusive of those caregivers and whom may be female, so that we don't have a gender divide in the office as we think about that as well.
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay, so I'll just throw it out to the group for anyone who's open to sharing. What tools are you using to support your organization in your current hybrid work model, or what tools are you looking to implement in your hybrid work model as you think, from a future state? Okay, so I'm seeing Zoom. Yeah, I think Zoom is very popular for all of us. So yeah, that's a great tool. And I really don't see that going away for any of us anytime soon, whether it's, Zoom or Google at WebEx. Yeah, so we've got those video-based meeting platforms. I think those are here to stay.
I share, we use Slack. We're quite heavy Slack user organization, and we find it's less than the email overload, because you can, and it kind of creates that, quick water cooler chat with your, or resource asking questions quite easily in a more of a text environment. A great point, SharePoint.
Yeah, that's great also. And Andrea, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to ask if we are talking just about some tech, supports that are considered tools, or any other tools, like, I don't know, outside meetings or phone calls, some just fun activities. So we were asking about the whole variety, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah. And Trudy, thanks for your share. You've shared here that cloud-based document sharing, so Google Docs, Teams, etc., and that really allows for that collaborative work piece, right? Where typically, if we're pre-pandemic, all in office, you may have a few folks huddled around, sharing on a whiteboard, etc. Mm-hmm. So the Google tools and Teams, etc., have really replaced that, right? So it's nice to find those tools and those products that really support and give us that like in office feel and drive those connections, because we know that that's vital.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the one that just comes to mind that we use quite readily is Jamboard, for that, where it looks like you could put a sticky note on, but it's obviously you're collaborating online. So another useful tool if you're able to consider that. Okay. Okay, all right. Let me get into. All right, so I'm going to kick us off into the employee life cycle consideration. So that sounds very HR speak, but basically it's how do we take what we've, Christine and I just talked through best practices and concepts, and apply them a bit more into the different stages of, the employee life cycle. And what I mean by that is, work as you consider hiring, onboarding, and you performance, learn, develop, and recognize. How are you modifying your practices and to support this notion of hybrid, that you're going to have employees in office and those that are online? And so, over the next few slides, we'll highlight some examples of what we've done to support high employee engagement from both work experiences, because both have to be taken into consideration. I know, when we consider being office is one, but also being remote is another, and that you have to build almost, think of both at the same time and not have one viewed as more preferred over the other, because that can create a perception that in office is the better experience. And so you just got to really think through both. So from an onboarding perspective, what we've done that worked well for us is we were predominantly before, as most very office centric. We had, employees that were, we had a small set of employees that were global or virtual, that at what we defined at that time would come into Waterloo to support to be able to experience the in-office culture of onboarding. So since then, we reverted to thinking digital first. So we took all our practices and did a whiteboard and said, well, what is the experience from hire all the way through to their first day in the office? So that included their onboarding forms. So we used our HRIS to support, which we had for a while already, the pre-onboarding. So check if you have a light, small HRIS to be able to support that process. It's all the, the paperwork, payroll, tax, etc. And all the way to what we engaged from our IT team is, well, how do they select their equipment? So we moved to a Google form that enabled them to select their tools and then provide a shipping address. So we were able to recreate instead of coming into the office to pick up the equipment, we were able to support all that from a virtual perspective. As part of the onboarding, we also created a virtual office tour. So we, as mentioned in a couple of slides ago, we are open. We support hybrid, so we wanted to give employees a visual of what the in-office experience looks like, and that included all our COVID safety protocols. We moved to hotel desking, so how to book a desk, how to experience, the different traffic signs and insert in our office. So we created, just with our employee on their phone, created a video, and we include that as part of our onboarding process. As well, from a tools perspective, we make it really easy as part of our first week to share how do we communicate and share and socialize, what are the norms in terms of when is something more an email, when do we use Slack, where do we store our documentation. So it's really important to have that central source of truth where things are stored. Also, we ensure that they are aware of certain chat channels. So whether that be for more work-related project, but also those social organic conversations, you want them to start to be feeling like they belong and they're part of the culture and they're making those connections. So again, that's really important from a retention perspective. Another idea is welcome videos. So the new hire can create a welcome video and it's posted to a central location, or perhaps it's part of your HRIS as part of they are able to create a welcome message of their own that gets posted to the entire organization. For example, we use Bamboo HR, and that's part of their pre-onboarding process, which has gone over quite well because it creates there's a picture, the employee uploads a picture of themselves and there's that welcome message, and it's lots of fun, unique things that we get to learn about each other. And as another thing that's worked well for us is that new hire buddy that we do assign. It's an informal program to each new hire to support the first month, of onboarding, because this is to support like questions they may not want to ask their leader all the time, but really what are the norms and practices of the team. What we've also done is assign a buddy that's not from the department as well to strengthen cross-functional collaboration. So there's, you can consider that as another idea that could be one within the team, or perhaps someone that's maybe more long-term tenured employee that can speak to the tribal knowledge of the company that you'd want to have them be partnered or placed up with for the new hire. So, and then overall, from an engagement perspective, that's your one of your outcomes is, with your practices. And what we felt worked well with us, and since picking up on the things that Christine shared as on the previous slides as well, is really being clear on your purpose and values as an organization. You really want to double down on what is your purpose and mission of the organization, how it may have changed, since March 2020, or, where are you ramping up for 2022? So really be clear that employees understand where the company is heading and the values that are part of that part of your organization. And we do this, we have bi-weekly company updates where our CEO speaks every Friday at 10 a.m. because we want to accommodate the different time zones that we're in, but really, which gets into the second bullet, part of our culture is that we're open and we're quite transparent. We are transparent in terms of what we're sharing. So how the company's doing from our sales and our financials, our plans for growth. We share all that because that's part of building that connection so employees can see the correlation between their work and their team's work into the overall vision and direction of the company. We also, as part of that, focus on collaboration, which ties in, the fourth bullet about company rituals and traditions. It's very important that, things that were important to your culture, think through, like, how can we modify this slightly in our hybrid way of working? Like, how can we sort of tweak it? Back to, my notion that we use in people and cultures, test, learn, and iterate. An example that we've done with that is recently we celebrated our 10th anniversary being in business, and we took into consideration 3 different ways of experiencing this event. We had an in-person, socially safe with COVID practices where we met outside, gathering of, a social event. We had, lunch and some swag, but then we also created a drive-through experience for those employees that did not want to come, into in-person, but felt safe driving through in a car experience. And then we also created an online experience as well for our remote employees that are in the US, UK, or just across Canada. So we're just applying that lens to how do we ensure they all experience what the perspective of that celebration is hoping to achieve. It may not be equal, but it's equitable in terms of how we're creating those new rituals and traditions. Another thing is for your leaders, if you have some leader training and some practices, just ensure that they get into habit of regular check-ins. And that could be set up at the beginning of a meeting where, there's time at 5 minutes at the beginning of the meeting where there's just some, light banter. How's everyone doing? How was your weekend? Or within a more one-on-one structured way, that there is more of that less task focus of, the weekly projects and so forth, but you really get into how are you doing? How's things, how's the workload manageable? Do we need to make some changes and tweaks? So just getting your leaders into that regular practice and cadence. Focus on health and wellness. There's many things that you can certainly do in a virtual environment that when practicing maybe have already the past 19, 20 months, but there are things that we do here at Exonify. We've done, yoga sessions or TED Talks or speaker series on more, non-work related, but stuff that supports that healthy work-life balance notion. Christine spoke about DE&I, make that a priority because that supports inclusivity and belonging. So that's an important aspect of engagement within the organization. We covered tools already, but for us, we use Slack to support internal communication. And the other aspect is ensure everyone is visible and included regardless of location. That's where you want to ensure you don't create that culture of have and have nots, like a divide between employees that perhaps are, for their comfort level or their work style, they would like to continue to be remote. So you don't want to have the perception that being in office is more welcome and supported from professional development opportunities, from promotion opportunities, but you just really want to have a lens to both experiences, ensuring that you're not intentionally creating that divide between the two office experiences. Okay, passing it to Christine.
Great, thank you. So just building off what Andrea shared from an engagement perspective, we know that a big part of keeping employees engaged over a longer period is demonstrating an investment in their learning and development. We know that that's a critical priority for folks, and those who have clear learning and development and career paths stay for a longer period of time with their organization. So we know that there is a tremendous amount of value in making that investment. So, one of the first pieces when we think about learning and development from a hybrid model is taking the time to upskill your managers in supporting their hybrid teams, right? So when we think of learning and development, we often think of it from an employee-centric lens, but really we can't forget the leaders. It's really important that if we want to offer an exceptional employment experience, that our leaders are well equipped with the skills that they need. And we know that their world and the definition of what it means to lead and the practices that they've relied on heavily to have successful teams, those have all been shook up as well. And so helping them feel successful in their roles as hybrid leaders is really important as well. The next is to think about in-house professional development programs your organization can offer. And that doesn't mean spending a lot of money. So I can share at DeGero, we've rolled out 4 separate programs and we haven't spent $1 on them. And they have been some of the most effective programs. So I've listed some of them here. So first is personal and professional mentorship program. So the way that works is you have other employees in the organization volunteer as mentors and support, right? And you develop guidelines to help say, okay, here's what the role of a mentee and a mentor looks like. These are some guidelines as to how often you should meet. Here's some as a mentee going into your first perhaps mentorship relationship and conversation. Here are some of the things that you may want to consider speaking to your mentor about. And as a mentor, here are some of the things that you may be asked or you should be prepared to speak about, right? And here's what the relationship isn't, right? So it's clear. It's helpful to put in some clear boundaries so that everyone can be successful in that and so that the program gets rave reviews, as they say, right? You want that to be promoted across your organization. The next is career interview or career conversations, right? So for folks who are saying, hey, maybe I'm I'm in software quality assurance right now, but I'd actually like to move and be a developer, but I don't know what that fully entails. Well, what better way to go and have a conversation with someone who's doing the work day in and day out, right? And so typically what we say is go have that conversation, learn more about it. So ask questions. What do you love about your day? What's the most challenging part of your day? What drove you here? What roles did you have before? What education do you have? What skills do you think would lead me to be successful in this role? And then from there, maybe you set them up then as a next step as a shadow day. So maybe they really enjoyed that conversation and want to continue that exploration piece. And so what we typically recommend is giving them an opportunity to shadow. So we typically set those up depending on the employee level, interest, et cetera, and availability of someone to have a shadowee, anywhere from 3 to 5 opportunities to shadow. And so what we say is have them, you know, virtually sitting next to you and working on some of that independent work. So see what it's like to do the independent work, go to some team meetings, and then go to some inter-team meetings, right? So see the collaboration with other departments, see what the team vibe is like, and then see what the individual work is like. And that's really important as well, just so you can get a realistic preview of what a day in the life of X role might be. The next is thinking about how often you have those career conversations, right? So we know that you don't just kind of make a plan and then revisit it in 5 years and naturally you're there, right? Any type of development and growth takes consistent effort. And so what we suggest is that you build in career conversations and career goals and planning into your actual performance cycles. So whether you're doing performance check-ins on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, biannual, annual, whatever that looks like, make that a regular part of the dialogue, right? And even I would suggest going as far as giving leaders the vocabulary and understanding and how to build that in on their one-on-ones, right? So say, hey, I know you were working towards X goal. How's that going? What tools are you needing? And is there anywhere that I can provide support for you? It's a quick 2-minute check-in, but it signals to the employee that, oh, right, I'm working towards something and someone's helping me hold myself accountable, right? You know, the employee has all the skills for them to be successful, but just having that little nudge sometimes is all they need to get to where they want to go. And then the other thing that really helps from a professional development and learning and development perspective is providing your employees an annual stipend and also paid time off to attend, right? And it doesn't have to be a lot of money, even a little bit of money, and gradually working your way up as it's fiscally responsible in your organization to do so really helps. It sends the message that we are invested in your continual development, personal, professional, and all of your career goals. So you're setting the tone there. And the other thing I can say is, you know, typically you'd set a budget for everyone and you may say it's 500 or 750 or 1,000 or whatever that looks like for your organization per head. And realistically, you're not going to have anywhere close to 100% utilizing that, right? But it's thinking critically about, okay, we've done a good job promoting, if you will, the stipend and paid time off. And then what you do is you can look at your stats, right? So who's typically not accessing those dollars and figuring out why, right? And then you can help encourage them to jump into the program as well. Okay, thank you. And the next piece, recognition. And if we, I think after the last 19, 20 months or whatever we're on, we know that you have to take that extra step for folks to feel recognized. You can't just bring a coffee back, or you can't just invite someone out to lunch, spur of the moment, or drop a little gift card on their desk. It takes an extra layer of thoughtfulness for that recognition. The other thing, that we know is that for recognition to really sink in, folks need to hear it about once every 2 to 3 weeks. And that feels like a lot, but realistically, we're asking a lot of employees, especially right now, right? We know that they're logging, Andrea mentioned this, but the employees are logging more hours than ever. We know that virtual meetings, for whatever reason, tend to be more draining on us from a mental wellness and a psychological perspective. And so saying that extra thank you goes a long way. And there's a few pieces to kind of what they say is the golden rule of recognition, right? So recognize when the achievement or behavior happens. So catch it when it happens, right? Recognize often, recognize privately, and recognize publicly. And the publicly one, I always say with a little bit of an asterisk, because you need to know the employee, right? So they may be mortified if you acknowledge them publicly. So just think critically through that, right? So I always say, recognize them privately and say, hey, we'd love to let you know you're our quarterly culture champion, or we really want to give the team kudos for your great work on this, whatever year-long project that you've just wrapped up. Is that something you're comfortable with if we called that out at our next town hall? And if they say no, that's okay too. You can still recognize them privately, pardon me. So, some of the, when thinking about your recognition, it doesn't always have to be these large large things, right? Think about some of the tools or the platforms that exist that make it really easy to send someone that virtual coffee or that virtual lunch or a gift card. Maybe they want to go and choose to have a meal somewhere, have something delivered. You know, I've mentioned Gusto here as one example, and it's a really great platform that we've been using for about 3 years now. It doesn't cost you anything to use it. You set your budget, and the great thing is you can sort of compartmentalize those dollars so that only your HR or people team will send out, or you can actually give each leader a budget and just say, here's your recognition budget for the year, and here's some guidelines. So this is what we would typically recommend for $20, right? So if you want to send a $20 gift card, or you want to send lunch, let's say, here's what efforts would usually translate into that, right? Or if you want to send 50 or 100 or 250, you know, here's what those amounts look like. And it's, you know, whatever platform works for you. I just recommended Gusto because it is free, which those of us who are being budget thoughtful or budget conscious, it's a really great platform. And the good news is every time you have a transaction on their platform, they donate one day of clean drinking water to those in need as well. The other thing that we've mentioned here is thinking about, you know, your Slack channels or your Google chats, whatever your virtual chat environment is. It's really easy to call out and tag people and catch values and actions, or gratitude Fridays, or, you know, just giving those little kudos wherever they pop up. Depending on your HRIS system, you may have an opportunity to tag folks and give them a little recognition banner within your feed as well. So there's lots of opportunities with tools that probably already exist within your organizations as well. E-cards, I think people still get a kick out of them. They're great, right? An easy way to send a little bit of joy, unexpected joy, and brighten someone's day. I mentioned it a little bit here, but milestone celebrations, right? It's really important as folks are digging into big projects that we celebrate those. And again, we talked a little bit earlier in our presentation about how celebrations look and feel differently, especially for everyone. But thinking through what a celebration, what an appropriate celebration or a comfortable celebration for each of your employees might be as they hit some of their key goals and milestones. And as I mentioned here, you know, think about, as we again refer back to some of the structure we suggested building in around celebrations and traditions, you know, what do you typically recognize? As I mentioned, you have quarterly culture champions. Do you recognize whether it's at your biweekly or your monthly happy hours or your town halls? What does that look like? And what types of behaviors do you want to call out? What types of behaviors do you want to celebrate so that you can help those flourish and let folks know that's what we want to cascade across the organization? Okay, and then we just have a couple resources here that we wanted to share. I think everybody's done a lovely job sharing what's worked for their organizations, and I know Andrea and I have shared a couple that have seemingly worked for our groups as well. But just a few others, Andrea and I were brainstorming that have really served us well from an HR perspective during the pandemic. Is Communitech has an excellent space for hybrid work and how to build out a hybrid work model and all the considerations. It's called the Get Back to Work space. So if you're a member of Communitech, I would strongly suggest checking that out. They've done an excellent job, tons of resources. And then the other one is Amplify Accelerator Open Source Learning Lab. So it's a bit of a mouthful there, but it's an excellent resource. They've got tools for everything in there, and really nice communities to chat in as well. So if you have questions, you can post and get a couple answers. And then GitLab's Complete Remote Playbook. This was Andrea's recommendation. You know, she's I can let her chat a little bit more about it, but
well, they are a 100% remote first company, and they have been for quite a few years. And so they have really almost perfected the art of working remotely to ensure collaboration and business continuity. So, and they have provided a workbook that's on their site to say how they do this and what's available. So everything from every company practice is listed and open and is available. But they've created a specific remote playbook as a result of the 19 months for other companies working remotely to really pick their brains and learn from a GitLab's approach to how they do this. And they are a global company, so it's another source that I reference quite often just to see how they do their people practices, for example. So another available free resource. And now we just have a few minutes before 12 to take any questions. So certainly if there's anything, drop them in the chat or come off video or mute, and happy to, Christine and I can chime in with some possible answers. Okay, and if not, Olga, I'm going to pass it back to you. I'm going to stop sharing and let you wrap up for us then.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much for this great presentation. I personally learned a lot there. It's so full of great resources and information just on point. It's wonderful. So we, as I mentioned, the whole thing was recorded, so we'll share it with, and because I think this is just a great chunk of information that we should share with as many as we can. And again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you very much, Andrea, and thank you very much, Christine. It was wonderful. Just one thing before I finish this this webinar, I will send a survey to participants. So just keep an eye on that in your email, and I'll really appreciate if you give us some feedback. Otherwise, if you do have some questions that that popped up in your head, maybe 5 minutes later, just send me a message at olga@workforceplanningsboard.com, and I'm happy to address those. Otherwise, we're done for today. And again, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and it was wonderful. Have a great day.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Bye.